In off-grid battery-based systems, installers can run into issues with traditional flooded lead-acid batteries because of the required maintenance involved. Customers might not want to do it, so you might not get that sale. Or a customer agrees, but mismanages it in some way, compromising the health of the batteries, lessening their life, and then they're looking for someone to blame. Today in the pitch, we're talking to Jeff Myles, marketing manager of Rolls Battery, who says installers should consider offering maintenance packages to help avoid these issues down the road. Hey, Jeff. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time again today.
Great. I'm happy to be here.
Start by explaining the importance of maintaining traditional lead acid batteries in an off-grid system. What are some of the things that commonly go wrong?
Sure. Well, one of the things, and it was kind of the most common scenario that we see with customers that choose a flooded lead acid battery is the need to monitor the status of the battery bank, whether it's properly charging, whether or not it needs water and things like that. And so there are some, kind of aspects in inspection that come to play with a traditional flooded lead acid battery that you wouldn't necessarily see with, some of the sealed models like AGM or even a lithium battery. If a customer chooses those, they're going to get a more affordable option for storage. But there is a bit of a flip side to that, in that you pay less for the product, but you do need to be a little more mindful of its performance and try to tweak it a bit.
And how on top of it are we talking exactly when you're like needing to pay attention? Since no two systems are really alike, what are these considerations we're taking into account when planning the right schedule and plan on the homeowner's part for monitoring and doing the O&M themselves?
Sure. So a lot of that will come into play dependent on the climate that the system is going to be operating in. If you're setting up a system that's going to be running year round and it's running winter versus summer, the actual maintenance of the battery bank is going to change somewhat in those situations, depending on where the battery is located. If the batteries are very warm, they're going to run through water more often than they would if they're kept cool. And in those situations, you do need to check them more often. So if the battery bank has been installed in, say, a utility shed or somewhere where it's going to heat up quite a bit in the summer, they're going to need to check the battery bank a little bit more often. Generally, if it's a system where you're going to be running it from May to September or October, you'll probably check that once or twice throughout that season. If it was a cooler climate, that you're probably going to find that you would only need to do it once or twice a year. So it would depend on whether or not the system's being used aggressively as well. If it's a day-to-day cycle, you're going to see that it's going to run through water a lot more often than a seasonal property or something like a cottage where they're using it on the weekends.
And what's interesting is that doesn't seem like a ton. But as you know, I don't need to tell you this, it still ends up being a lot for some customers who are maybe not paying attention or paying attention in the right ways. And I think this makes sense, as you've talked about, installers getting in front of potential issues by offering maintenance packages. So I was hoping you could explain that. Like, how are these structured and how are they being offered to customers?
Sure. So one of the things that installers will do when they are kind of interviewing the customer to determine what their usage needs will be, kind of short-term changes in the usage as well. Are they planning to expand or renovate or things like that? They have to factor that into the size of the system. But in setting up and packaging that system, one of the questions that they would want to ask the customer is, what is going to be your level of involvement in the management of this system? Are you comfortable with performing specific gravity tests on the cells in the battery periodically? And when I say that, I mean every maybe 6 to 8 weeks. If they're not interested in doing that, or that's something that they just simply don't feel that they would be able to take on, then you would provide them options like a sealed battery, for example, to take that aspect of the maintenance away. If they're relatively engaged and they're willing to make that commitment to be able to do that, then the installer may be able to offer a maintenance service where they would come out, maybe once or twice or 3 times a year to do a full inspection of the system, check all of the system components, make sure that, every aspect of that off-grid system is in check, and also to see whether or not it's actually operating as efficiently as it could be. And sometimes there's some tweaking involved in programming. Oftentimes we don't like the customer to kind of fumble around with that. And so the installer is kind of better suited to do that because they've been trained on how to work with that equipment. If it was a customer, for example, elderly, or a customer who maybe had been ambitious about doing those things, but then they simply can't anymore, the installer can also offer kind of an add-on service where they go out and do that routine check a little bit more often, see whether or not the battery bank is balanced and charging properly, and then make some tweaks and maybe perform a little maintenance service to be able to get it back on track. If you do that more often, the system will last a lot longer for the customer. And so it's an investment in getting a lot more years of use out of the battery bank versus kind of neglect and hoping that it's going to last as long as you were pitched.
Are there ways for these packages to go wrong potentially, or something, the way that it's structured or the deal itself, maybe being explained insufficiently? Just any words of caution about when you're pitching these and putting this service plan together?
Yeah, one of the most important things I think I would stress, when we're speaking to this, especially to the installers, is that you need to factor in your time and cost of travel, but also, look at what the customer's expectation is with this system as far as the number of years of service. If you are telling that customer this battery bank is going to last you 15 years, then you're setting yourself up in a scenario where you essentially now need to meet that expectation. The other thing is, if that customer lives in like a remote location, a lot of times off-grid customers will choose to do that. If they do that, it may not be as accessible for the installer to go out and be able to do it. And the travel costs can be quite high depending on the scenario. And so the installer may be reluctant to kind of pitch the idea of doing a full service package where they go out and routinely check it, because that transit time is cutting into their opportunity to service another customer. So you'd have to build that in and set that expectation with the homeowner.
In that example right there, say this customer would prefer a maintenance package of some sort, like they would not want to do it on themselves. At that point, should the installer just say, well, let's switch to a sealed and AGM battery? Because would the cost maybe be similar in a certain way?
Generally, the AGM batteries will cost, there will be a premium to go with AGM, but the flip side to that is that with a sealed battery, there still is some level of maintenance that's involved in the system. So there would still need to be some, inspection and retorquing of the terminals and things like that. And also ensuring that the system is properly charging those batteries, regardless if it's flooded or AGM. If those situations are happening, it's great to go with an AGM product, but they're also going to need to replace those batteries more often than they would with flooded. So if, the cost of transit is a factor, keep in mind that if you're having to replace those batteries more often, you're now having to purchase replacements, but also to ship them. So, we've talked to customers where the shipping costs are extremely high based on their scenario, and accessibility to get them in there is difficult. So that can play a factor as well.
I can see there being a pro to just proactively staying in a customer's life in a way, and for good reasons. It's not they're calling you because something's broken. You're just kind of checking in and making sure everything's running. Am I right in thinking that there is value in that? And is there value beyond it just being kind of like nice to say hi? Like, will the installer get more out of that relationship over time?
Yeah, one of the big things, especially with installers that have proven to be very successful in this industry, is engaging with the customer, not always in a situation of crisis. So, the maintenance is a great example of that. By going out and performing that, proactively and making sure that the system's tweaked, they can go in, they can do it. The customer sees that it's working, so their confidence in the installer is obviously there. They're more likely to refer that installer to another customer, if they've had a great experience. And if the customer is not only calling that installer when there's a problem, they're not associating that installer with issues. They're associating with, success.
Because the downside risk, to me at least, of a customer not performing their own maintenance, even if they think they're going to, is kind of so great. Should installers always be tying a service package to a flooded lead acid battery installation just kind of as a baseline best practice?
Ultimately, yes. If they're able to do that, offer it as a value add service, package the system. A lot of times people get kind of sticker shock looking at packaging. One thing that they can do to sell this is to, put together packages where you would have the option for a flooded system. Here's an option with the flooded battery bank. It's going to be the most affordable because it's going to be the lowest cost energy storage. Here's an option with AGM, which would be slightly higher. Here's an option with flooded, but also tie in the maintenance. And the difference in price, ultimately the customer may see that as an appealing option because they see that the batteries were cheaper. When they need to replace those batteries, if they go with the same battery bank, ultimately that's going to be lower cost as well. And they also know that it's not just the batteries that are going to be an aspect of maintenance. The whole system needs to be checked. The big thing is the education with the customer prior to making that decision. Give them as much information and options as possible. And then once that's been done, the customer can then make an informed decision. And if they choose to go with that maintenance and find maybe that it's a little overwhelming, you could potentially offer an add-on service where you then come in and kind of take that over at an hourly rate or whatever. So it's a revenue stream for the installer. It's a great way for them to kind of plan ahead and schedule routine visits, which is obviously going to be guaranteed revenue for them throughout the year. And also it's client building and it's going to build some loyalty with those customers as well.
Well, that was great info. Thanks for taking the time to walk us through today. And, I guess regardless of which option a customer chooses, Rolls Battery as a solution for them, where can everyone find more information about what you guys have to offer?
So our batteries are sold exclusively via distribution. You can view all of our product line at rollsbattery.com. And we do offer a full distribution map where you can put in your location and it will provide you a list of options for dealers, warehouse locations, and distributors. And most of those do sell direct to installers, and the installers certainly will be able to get as much information about the products, whether it's through the distributors or direct from us. We also work very closely with the installers to provide technical training on how to properly use the product, because we understand the importance of making sure that obviously when they go out in the field and use that they're well prepared. So.